Hello, wrestling fans, and welcome to the JJ Dillon Podcast. I am your co-host, JP John Pod, and with me, as always, is the star of the show, the two-time Hall of Famer, the leader of the Four Horsemen, the second greatest manager of all time, and a former WWF and WCW executive. Of course, talking about James J. Dillon. JJ, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Great to talk to you.
Now, JJ, tonight is going to be a very specific topic, and we'll get into that in a second. But how did you feel after the first show? Everything going good? Because we got some great feedback as far as the show.
Yes, I live in Delaware, which is, a kind of a secluded place. It's about the size of New Jersey, but the population is, or about the size of California, but population is less. The whole state's less than 1 million people, so it's a great place to live. My reason I came back here was because my mother was originally from here. So when my father passed and she was getting up in years, my journey brought me back here so as to be by her, and while I still had her, and then I needed because I had children again late in life, and I had to provide benefits for them. So I needed to find work, and ended up with working for the Department of Correction at the prison here in Smyrna, and ended up when it was all said and done, that retired from there with about between 11 and 12 years of service. So I've had a really diverse background and experience in life, and really liked it here in Delaware and stayed here, and it's very quiet, and like I say, the cost of living is very reasonable, and I'm like 65 miles from the Philly airport and about 85 from BWI. So in terms of going somewhere, it's accessible. And I'm not a beach goer, but I'm like 50 miles from Rehoboth Beach if I want to go down there and look on the boardwalk and enjoy the sun a little bit. So it's a great place.
Yeah, Delaware, great place to live, that is for sure. And as far as last week's show, it was definitely a blast getting to talk to you and kind of relive a lot of those memories, relive MSG in 1984. It's just quite an honor for me to be able to get to talk to you for as long as we did last week, and kind of delve into a lot of different topics, and definitely getting into the world of the executive department of wrestling, the backstage role and behind the scenes of professional wrestling.
Yeah, well, it was an eventual journey was going to have to be in that direction. And I may have pointed it out last week that I started full time with when Jim Crockett Sr. was still alive in Charlotte, 1981, something like that. And, I realized at that point that, I in terms of being active, going to events and being involved in the ring as a manager, whatever, was very limited because of my age. So I realized that way back prior to that. So the whole time since, I guess even going back to the 60s, a lot of people focus on their individual career, and which is understandable because it's a very competitive business and a lot of uncertainty. So that's important to stay on top of things. But at the same time, I had to look at the big picture and realize that because of my age, being an on-air personality and so forth, even as a manager, which gives you more longevity, still was not, going to give me an unlimited future. So I totally was involved in behind the scenes, television production, how shows are put together, how they're structured, involved in talent relations, where a lot of guys are, it's a full-time job just managing their own individual career. And, I was looking more at the big picture.
Now, as far as today's episode, I want to talk about you leaving the WWF in 1996. So we'll kind of just start a little bit from the beginning. And how did you actually get into the executive role, into the WWF? I mean, we're going to do a whole separate episode on '89 and different topics as far as getting in. But just kind of briefly, how'd you get in with Vince when you left Crockett?
I had been close friends with Terry Garvin, who we had worked together back when I was booking in Amarillo, and he was basically booking talent, and he was booking towns. So we had to work in a harmony with each other, and same thing in Kansas City. So I got to know Terry and had a lot of respect for him, and of course, really build a rapport with him. And then he was very close to Pat Patterson, and I hadn't met Pat, I think, one time at a location when Terry was there, and he introduced me, but I knew about Pat. I knew, that, he and Stevens were superstars out on the West Coast of California, and went to Minneapolis. And I had always heard that Pat was, I knew that he was highly respected as an in-ring talent, but also the creative side of business too. So Terry had told me that he was going to work for the WWE, and this was right about the time when Crockett. I was still working for Crockett Promotions, and you could see the handwriting on the wall that the business had changed, and Crockett, going back to when I started there with Jim Crockett Sr., was always a business that was very loyal to the people that were part of their structure. And what happened was that those same people were involved as the business grew and grew, but everything grew it just exploded in terms of growth. And to be honest with you, as I look back and reflect, and this is not to disparage anybody who was there, but the people that were there were great at what they did, but they were used to doing it on a scale which Crockett Promotions would embrace. And then when it got to be so big and so much more involved, a lot of the people that were there, and this is just an opinion on my part, I think some of those people, were really overwhelmed, and a lot of them, had homes, had family, and the thought of them having to go on the road, leave or relocate or something was a scary thing with him. So I could see that and with the business changing, the old days of Crockett that was a mainstay in the Mid-Atlantic area, and even though it grew and went into Ohio as they branched out, to go on a national, let alone a global basis, the people that they had, I don't think embraced the idea of that kind of a challenge. So that was something that really needed to be addressed. And I had, as a talent, had been all over the world. I spent a year in Australia, wrestled and worked there and booked there. And all along, each stop along the way, even going back way before that, I realized that my days were numbered as an in-ring talent, and that I needed to expand my horizons and get an understanding of television production and how TV basically was the lifeblood of the business, because that's how towns were promoted as far as I was concerned back to the territory days. You did a TV, and you did a TV, and you had, even when they were doing local market-specific interviews, which did for a while too, where the television program had like 6 2-minute spots that the wrestling promotion, sometimes it was 4, sometimes it was 6, and it was like a barter deal. They would produce an hour of television and basically hand a finished product to the network that they were accustomed to being on, and then the promotion would want to hold at least 2 of the 2-minute spots, so that if you were running live events, that's where your live event centers would go in to promote. As the TV would bicycle around to all your towns, you could put market-specific promos where you wanted to, and then the balance of the airtime, which would be another 4 spots or 5 spots, went to the television network, and they used that to sell advertising, and ratings for wrestling had always been consistent and excellent. So basically, the TV station was happy because they got a finished product. They had no problem with the people that produced the TV of keeping 2 of the spots to promote live event shows in the area, and then they had the balance of that time to sell. They got a finished product, and that's where their revenue came from. It didn't cost them anything to produce the TV show. It was handed to them, and then they could turn around and sell the balance of the commercial time. So it was pure profit for them, and that's basically how the business was structured.
Now, as far as WWF and getting in there and Vince McMahon, everyone has such high opinions, or maybe even low opinions. Everyone just has an opinion on Vince McMahon Jr., and everyone says, is he this? Is he that? What is your kind of opinion kind of going in there and obviously starting working for him? Is it that he is, this kind of brash, crazy executive that is, I won't say a genius, but like on that level, like he's so smart, smarter than everybody else?
I'll go on record saying Vince McMahon is a genius. So
okay.
There you go. That's a quote from me. And I'm not seeking a job. I'm just speaking truth to fact. And I go back when I was, still working in the office, when TV or when live events would come to the major markets, say Philadelphia, Vince McMahon Sr. would come to the towns. Now, he wouldn't go to the TVs and everything, but he would come to the major markets. And Willie Golsenberg would do the same, and Willie would come from New Jersey. And so I developed a rapport on a first-name basis with Vince, which was good for me. And then later on, that came into play when my name was mentioned to Vince. He knew me, had been around me, and I had that good relationship with him, which really worked out well for me.
So was it a friendship, so to speak, or was it just kind of a business relationship?
We didn't really socialize, other than Vince would, after TV, would go out and have dinner. They used to do TV up in Hamburg, and they would then stay overnight in Reading. And I went to college in Reading, so that was an area, and I lived there. So that was a very familiar area with me. And Vince, when TV was over, would take the nucleus of his people and have a kind of a dinner to reward everybody for the hard work with each TV cycle. So I got to know Vince Sr. In that manner.
What about Junior? Was that like a friendship there? Because you said you created a rapport with him and you got to know him pretty well. Was there a relationship there, a friendship there?
Yes, because a lot and people that want to look into it, it's not like it's a huge secret, but a lot of people, Vince he bought the promotion. It's not like it was handed to him. Mm-hmm. And he, which a lot of people don't know too, ventured into a couple things before that in which they failed and lost money. One was he bought the arena in Cape Cod and did okay, and then fell on hard times, and it was a losing proposition. So he's been someone who didn't have everything handed to him. It wasn't like his father handed him a thriving business, said, here it is. Vince bought it from his father and paid his dues along the way, which is why I have so much respect for Vince, because he doesn't ask anybody to do anything that he hasn't already done himself. And it's a lot easier to respect somebody who just doesn't, has everything handed to them that they didn't have to work for it and earn it. And I'll go on record as saying Vince earned everything. But he also, he had the vision too. When he realized that the internet and cable television based out of Atlanta was going to, that was the old fiefdoms of the back in the day, there were probably 25 individual separate promotions around the United States, each of which was one in Florida. There was one in Michigan, and each of them would produce their own television show. And Tennessee was one too. So Eddie Graham established Florida as based, he liked the credibility of treating it like a legitimate sport. So he was surrounded by the Jack Briscoes of the world, legitimate amateurs who had credibility. They had the amateur background. And yet you went to Tennessee with Nick Goulas, and it was, or went up to Michigan and Ohio with the Sheik, and it still said wrestling on the marquee, but when you went in the building, you were watching a totally different show in Michigan and Ohio, because the Sheik was running around going crazy, throwing fire and doing things, which was totally foreign to what you were seeing in Florida. So wrestling, it's not like there's a book that says, oh, wrestling, let me open and see what it is. Oh, well, this is what I have to do. And to be recognized as wrestling, it falls in this, in this parameters. No, wrestling is whatever you establish it for your particular audience. And then what changed all of that was when cable television came along. And I remember being in Amarillo, every time that because Amarillo would produce their own TV. And most of the guys that would go in there, because of the expense of getting an apartment and getting their kids in school, most of the guys tried to come there and stay at least 6 months to a year. Wrestling fans were always telling the promoter, Jerry Kozak, who was, along with Nick Kozak, had been a great tag team, and Jerry and his wife promoted Amarillo. And Edie did the business part of it, and Jerry was kind of the figurehead up front guy. But Amarillo was a great territory. One of my favorite places to go. Amarillo with the Funks, similar situation that Amarillo, Lubbock, Abilene, even down to El Paso was a separate territory, and they each produced their own TV show. But like I say, when cable television came along, I remember being in Amarillo, and the fans they're seeing a telecast with Wildfire Tommy Rich on TBS and Buzz Sawyer. So they're saying to Jerry Kozak and there's other local promoters are hearing the same thing. They always would say, well, when are we going to see somebody new? And the expense of bringing somebody in is such that when somebody comes in, they're going to stay for a while. You can't change faces every week. You can move some people in and out, but you can't do it on a wholesale basis. But the fans would still, when am I going to see somebody new? And then it really got, I don't want to say a problem. Yeah, I guess it really was a problem when all of a sudden TBS is now on. So the fans can see the promotion's product that they produce in Amarillo, the Sheik's territory, they see their thing, but they're now each of them also seeing what comes out of TBS on the cable. and because they're seeing Buzz Tyler and the guys that were on TV every week, now the local promoters are being hit with, well, when am I going to see, Wildfire Tommy Rich? When is he going to be on the card here locally? Well, it's hard thing to explain to the local fans. Well, yeah, you're seeing them on TV, but it's like they're based out of Atlanta, and those guys stay there, and they maybe go out to some isolated things, but it's not like, they're going to be in our town every week. So that was kind of a transition period of time for the business, and really, really changed everything.
And you think that Vince Jr. was way ahead of the curve as far as that, and really kind of scooping up those territories, buying out those territories, getting the TV, and then turning it into national TV?
Yes, because he saw the handwriting on the wall, where all the rest were putting all their energy into trying everything possible to save the status quo, without realizing that it was a futile effort, that cable television was now changing the landscape, and it was never going to go back to be like it was. They couldn't pretend that those other programs weren't on the air, and because the fans are the ones that decide, what they're going to buy a ticket to see, and they're the ones that are going to express, what their desires are. And that's where Vince realized what the future held. So he started going out to a lot of these local, and some of these deals were in territories were barter deals. And by barter deal, I mean, let's see, I'm trying to think of, let's say Kansas City. Okay, they do a show in Memorial Hall, they tape it, and it shows live that weekend in Kansas City, and they use the two-minute spots to promote the live events that are going to be coming there week to week. But then that tape the next week went to Wichita. And when it went to Wichita, the television station would be sent separately two-minute commercials to put at specific spots in the show, promoting whatever live events were going to be held in that area that were serviced by that TV. And then sometimes there wasn't a live event. And so the promotion would have to do a generic thing just to keep the interest there. And the other 4 spots, the local television station then sold them. And because wrestling got good ratings, it was a good deal for them. They got an hour program that was complete, and they got 4 television commercial spots that they can sell locally, and that money was their revenue, and they had no cost to produce it because it was a show handed to them with everything there, but those open commercial spots that they could sell locally. So that's how the business was structured in those days.
And even fast forwarding a little bit as far as the WWF is concerned, and Vince, they became the dominant thing. WCW obviously was still there, but they were the clear number 2. But by the time, as we kind of get rolling forward a little bit, and '96 rolls around, no longer is the WWF that number 1 and that dominant number 1. They almost fall back. Well, not almost. They do. They fall back into the number 2 hole, and WCW under Bischoff is becoming the number 1 thing. And you were in WWF basically for 7, almost 8 years at this point. And at this point, you're going to leave the WWF. What was the reasoning at this point for basically leaving and quitting the WWF?
Just to go back in time, the TBS people were not wrestling people. Ted Turner loved wrestling. Mm-hmm. And really the board of directors people, the suit people at Turner at TBS Tower, they would have been just as happy to see a product that was generating revenue and, being profitable. A lot of them looked at it as, wrestling, God, it's so lowbrow that, you got the Braves and you got the Hawks and you got other things. And that there were a lot of people that if wrestling went away and wasn't seen, they would not have been disappointed by that. And the only reason that wrestling remained part of the programming was Ted Turner. Ted was not going to be told that we're taking wrestling off the air. I mean, it wasn't going to happen as long as Ted was alive, just because it was something that he had pioneered there. And it's like when he bought a UHF station, I think it was Channel 17, the core of his programming was wrestling on Saturdays and the Atlanta Braves. And it was back when the Braves, they tried not to get beauty shots because the places were empty, the stands were empty. And they tried every promotional thing, from people rolling peanuts with their nose up the third base line and one on the first base line, see who got to the bag first. I mean, they some of the crazy things they did to try and generate interest. But that's the nature of the business. But and there were people who looked down on it. But as long as Ted was there, wrestling was going to be a part of it.
Turner definitely, loved wrestling and kept it near and dear. And it's funny that, all these years later and ending up in '96, Bischoff is in charge. Ted Turner puts down the edict that there must be a Nitro, and then all of a sudden Nitro takes off. So Ted Turner always kept a close eye on wrestling. Was always loved wrestling. And it's funny that in '95 he's basically throwing down the gauntlet, saying, "You know what? I want to compete with Vince McMahon, and I want to have my own wrestling company and wrestling show on TNT."
What happened too, which a lot of people may not know, is that Ted went to Vince and said, "I want to buy into your promotion and would like to be a partner." And Vince said to Ted, "I don't have partners. I own it all, and it's going to stay that way." Well, it was a slap at Ted. So then that was the impetus for Ted to then look at what he had to do to start from scratch and really basically, be in competition to Vince. And that's how it all started. And it was, I always, and this is true in anything, you always are, whatever your business, and getting aside from wrestling, but wrestling in particular, wrestling is healthier when there's competition, because without competition, it's very easy to become complacent, and the business is okay, doing good, making money. But the minute that you're threatened with competition, then the level of the program takes on a whole new look, because there is that competition. So it would be hard to tell somebody like a Ted Turner that you're better off because now you're in a fight and you're having to bring people in that you might not have thought about doing otherwise because you're in this war. And wrestling was better for competition.
Absolutely. And in '96, do you think WWF was a little bit, as you're making your exit, do you think that WWF was a little bit of a sinking ship?
When Bischoff came in, he had been working in Minneapolis, and they didn't really know what he did. And I don't want to diminish whatever he did do up there, but he was able to tell the story the way he wanted to with his version. So when they were looking for somebody in Atlanta to run the program, somebody said, "Oh, this guy Eric Bischoff, this is exactly what we need. He's one of us. He's a TV guy, but he's one that knows wrestling." So they opened the door and put out the red carpet for Eric to come in. And of course, Eric wasn't going to tell them any different. And Eric accomplished a lot. He really did. I'm not diminishing what he did, but a lot of it was smoke and mirrors. And the people at TBS, as long as the numbers grew and the company was profitable. And what happened was there was a period there, which happens because wrestling is cyclical. And I was working in the office. We had moved out into Smyrna, Georgia, and had a separate office, and they had rings set up, and the power plant was trying to develop new wrestlers with Paul Orndorff, and it's like all of a sudden they hit a spot where things, weren't going that well. And of course, the people, when they were enjoying it, didn't know why it had been successful and why now it had hit a lull. And they bought into Eric, and they thought, well, I guess Eric's going to have all the answers. Well, Eric, did well when business was good, and when it didn't, like a lot of other people. I've been in that position too, where all of a sudden you don't have the answers. And that's why in the old days, the territories would change bookers. And Jody Hamilton would be in Atlanta, and he'd have a hell of a run with his guys. And then they would bring in Dusty with his guys out of Florida, which would be new faces. And there were people that were loyal to Dusty, and, they would go on and business would pick up again with different faces. And that's how the business thrived and did well for quite a while, because there were enough Jody Hamiltons and Dusty Rhodes to run the place. But there weren't a lot of people who either had maybe the ability to look beyond just on a small scale, where they had to look at a producing a television program, doing so on a national basis, and territories, including Atlanta, as a result, had their periods where they fell in hard times.
And do you think Vince Jr. is one of those guys that got it despite, in '96, despite it kind of being a sinking ship, and despite them becoming number 2? Do you think Vince still had that vision of where he wanted things to go? Do you think he still kind of was the master, the genius that you previously thought he was?
My opinion never changed, Vince. I worked for him, worked there 7 years, worked with he and Pat. We work in the office all week, and then all of the creative was done on the weekends in Vince's home with a casual atmosphere. And in the summer times, we'd be out at the pool, and I watched Shane, and not so much. He was off running with his buddies, but I watched Stephanie grow up, because she would bring her other girls, and they were splashing and having a good time in the pool. And Vince had a cabana out there, so that if it rained, we were covered, and he had a whole bank of phones. And he, Pat, and I basically, that's how the company was run. And Vince had the final say on everything, which says it has to be structured that way. And Pat, Vince takes none of the blame for anything that didn't work out, and all the credit for everything that was successful. And that's just how it is. And Pat Patterson is probably the of all the people that I've been around and worked with, and I've been around some, I think of Eddie Graham as my mentor and a genius, but right up there was the people that came out of Florida, and they were successful. And I lost my train of thought, but
as far as Pat,
as far as Pat was there, and Pat had been around San Francisco with Stevens and worked for Shires, and Roy Shires, what little time I was around him, realized that he was a true genius too. And Pat was smart enough to be there. And so when later in his career, when Pat got involved in the creative side of it, he could sit with the talent and make an assessment or come up with a creative idea and he would have the credibility because he wasn't speaking in theory. He had done it. All you had to do was look at the run that Stevens and Pat had in San Francisco with Shires. A hell of a run, and for years. And then it wasn't like something, well, this was the luck of being that right place at the right time. They went to Minneapolis and did the same thing again. And again, it's because Pat understood the big picture. He was a great in-ring performer. He was a great understander of talent, could deal with talent, and somebody who, man, I have so much respect for personally and professionally. And then with Vince, Pat knew, he learned early on what Vince liked and didn't like. And he knew he would learn real quickly if he threw something out there and it just didn't fit with what Vince was comfortable with. Instead of Pat going to the trenches and getting into a fight with Vince to try and convince Vince that Pat was right and Vince was wrong, Pat was smart enough to not get into those situations. And he learned what Vince liked. And he then took and fed Vince what he liked by the shovelful. And it was, and we would sit there and we would go to TV, and we each had this great big ledger. Like if we were doing 3 towns a night, we would have all the towns on each page so that we would have a record there of who was there and everything. And then when we would do TV, Pat and I would sit in the back with our book open, and we would have, each of us would have our own way of little handwritten notes here and there. And Vince would sit up front, and he would have the final version of which we all had input in and agreed which Vince was most comfortable with. And then Pat and I would sit in the back, and Vince would run the entire show. And it wasn't like we needed to be up there at the table next to him or to try and send a message that, that we had a lot of input in whatever the final result was. That's not what my head was, and Pat either. We were just happy to be part of an incredibly successful run. And there were times where Vince would be up there with a book, and he would be telling all the people, like, all of this came from Vince's mind, which was fine. Pat was comfortable with that, and so was I. And sometimes, things would change, and this didn't happen with great regularity, but every now and then we would make a change for the better, and Vince, this was the last minute thing, he would forget to erase out something and write in what the best thing was that we decided to do. And all of a sudden, Vince would be doing the production meeting, and he would be putting out this thing that all of a sudden I'm looking at my book, and I look at Pat's looking at me, and it's like, what? You're on third base. We got the home plate and changed everything. So
yep.
Pat or I would raise our hands and say, Vince, I just have a note here. I think that you decided that what you wanted to do was this, and that's what I wrote down. Then Vince would say, oh, yes, that's right. It was in my mind, and that's, yes, and I just forgot to write it down. Thank you for reminding me. and Pat and I, it wasn't about us getting, credit, and there were people there that probably figured out what was going on, but I would say 95% of them looked at Vince, and then, like I say, he had that reputation of being the genius, and Pat and I were fine with that. We had job security, we were doing well financially, and it just was a system that worked out very smooth.
That is a great system. You agree, and it's very simplistic, and it's funny that you guys were, for a long time, the number one in organization, making so much money. It was very simplistic, and they kind of got away from that for a while. That's for sure. Is there, like you said, as far as hanging out with Vince at his house and doing creative on the weekends and hanging out in the pool and things like that, is there an actual way to be close to Vince McMahon? Like, obviously, you're working with him very tight, but like on a personal level, is there a way to get close to him?
I never really thought of it that way. I mean, we would be in the office all week, and Vince was hands-on in everything. If we had a pay-per-view and they were going to do a poster, that poster wouldn't go until Vince came in and looked at it. And a lot of times he'd say, "Okay, that's fine. Or I want to take that out, and I want to put this in." I mean, he had final say on everything. So it's not like Pat and I were doing it and Vince was taking the credit. No, Vince was hands-on and the final say on everything. And Pat and I were just two guys that had a lot of experience, and Pat in particular understood Vince's likes and dislikes. And so between the three of us, it was a system that really, really worked very, very well. And there were good times for me. We were working 7 days a week, and what was funny was we would finish Friday, and then Pat, I was married. Well, I got married when I was there, and I'd been living with my last wife at that time, and Pat and Louis Vandera was still there, and so Pat didn't really, it was like we would work all day with Vince, and I couldn't wait to get away because I would just be drained, and I would want to be home with my wife and enjoy a home cooked meal and time with her and just kind of decompress. And we would do that all day, and I'm waiting, anxious to get home. And Pat would say to Vince, "What are you doing tonight?" "Well, I don't have anything. I was going to go in and say, well, I'll join you." And I'm thinking, oh, my God, Pat, you're volunteering. And, of course, Vince, he'd love to have Pat's company. And I don't know. I needed, I guess balance is the word that I'm trying to come up with. I needed some balance. I didn't mind working 7 days a week, but there were times where I wanted, and what would happen was we would be doing TV starting Monday, and we would work Saturday, and we would have 3 weeks of TV that we were going to do Monday. One show that was live, and then the other two we were going to tape for the following weeks, and that's back when it was like 3 week cycles. And we would start with blank papers. We'd have 3 blank papers, and we would get out there all day Saturday, and Vince he wouldn't want to immediately go to those 3 weeks. And I learned a lot from Vince, because what I learned to do was I'd have a roster of the heels and baby faces, kind of like if you're a baseball manager, you want to have it's like here's your team roster. So as you're plugging stuff in, and especially when you're booking like an A show and you got 2 other towns that are B's or a BC, you would put 2 main events in the big town, and then you need a good main event in the other 2 towns, and then the smaller the town, the less strength you would need under it. And in the big town, you had to understand how to balance all of that. And Pat and I worked very well together because we understood the concept, and it was easy to give Vince ideas and present things, and finally come up with something that he was very comfortable with. And I think the success of the business for the time that we were there speaks for itself, and how well that formula worked for us. But when we were doing TV, we would get there Saturday and have 3 weeks of TV, 3 blank sheets. And Vince's MO was, well, I'd like to look ahead and then work backwards. So here we are, Royal Rumble time. He's looking at WrestleMania the following year. And he's want to, in his own mind, have a vision of what he thinks his main event is going to be. And then that determines what you're going to do with, with your other major, because there were like 4 major pay-per-views, and that's before they got into the monthlies. And then you could, well, if we do that at WrestleMania, we could do this at this, and we could do this at SummerSlam, and he would work backwards, which made sense in that you at least have a plan. The only problem is that if you're using the Ultimate Warrior as an example, and you've got, well, we could have work with him here, and we could do the build up with this match here, and and work back, and then the Warrior would do something crazy and get fired in the Garden, and all of that dialogue, all of that brain thing,
oh my God,
all of it start all over, and it takes a special mindset to, I mean, some people would say you put so much energy and you finally, after 3 or 4 days, got this, and now it's useless. You got to start all over. And that could be very discouraging. But Pat and I had been in the business long enough that we understood the nature of the business, that either somebody got fired or somebody got hurt serious enough that they were going to be out 6 months. And if they were a key player, it's okay. How are we going to adjust to that? How are we going to, we still got to draw in the meantime. So it was a challenge, and it also was something that not everybody could do. And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but it took people like Pat, and I look at Pat as probably the greatest mind that I ever worked with, because he could do that. He had the vision, and yet he could also be in the main event and perform. Pat could do it all. He was to be the greatest, and it was a good time for me. But I would come home Saturday, and we wouldn't have the TVs written. And when we would leave, a lot of times we would stay, and then we would be drained, and Vince would say, "Well, have dinner, stay here." And he had a housekeeper, Mary, that an Oriental woman that was a great cook. And most of those weekends, I would, a lot of times Pat would leave and go because he would have dinner plans with Louis, and I would stay and be invited and have dinner with he and Linda. And Shane wasn't there very often, nor was Stephanie. And just have dinner. And so I got to be around Vince and have a relationship with him socially in the sense that yes, we had a business relationship, but he and I could laugh and have a good time and really talk about anything and everything. And they were great memories for me.
But it sounds like it's a very stressful job. Sounds like 7 days a week, which means no time off, no vacations.
Yep.
It just seems like, especially after 7 years, you're almost getting like a 7-year itch thing kind of going on, where it's just too much. It's getting to be such a pain. Is that kind of what led to the exit, where you just kind of just getting frustrated, just not really with Vince per se, but just the overload of work? It sounds crazy.
Yep. And you're looking to move on, and it's like the grind, and I refer to the grind makes it sound negative, and in many ways it was, but you're doing something that you love doing, but in doing something that you love, it's very demanding too, extremely demanding. And you have to sacrifice a lot. Your family sacrifices a lot for it, and you're at the mercy of each television that you write and the crowds, the towns that you book, and how you're doing well, how the company is doing well financially. And we had an incredible run there because Pat understood Vince. Pat and I worked extremely well together, and we had an incredible run. We had an incredible run, and yet I could, at the end of a workday, be drained, and Vince would say, well, here, don't, have dinner here, and I would sit down and have dinner with him, enjoy it. I enjoyed the time with he and Linda and having dinner, and sometimes we talk business, sometimes we do, but Vince never asked anybody to do anything that he didn't do himself. And by that, I mean, Vince had a manila legal pad at his bedside with a pencil. And Vince would wake up out of a sound sleep at 3 a.m. because either he dreamed something or was having a vision, and he would sit up, turn the light on, grab the pen and pencil, and he would write notes for fear that in the morning he would forget about it, or, God, did I dream that? And so a lot of powerful stuff. Vince the business was everything to him. And he before that, he had the hockey team in Cape Cod, failed, business venture, went bankrupt. And there was something else that he did that went bankrupt too. So Vince didn't have everything. A lot of people, his father did it, just handed it to him. No. Vince did it on his own, with his own money, and failed a couple times, and felt that he was better for the failures and learned from them. And so that's why I have, there are 7 years, I have so much respect for Vince. And, after 7 years, you leave, and it wasn't, leaving is not always easy, but it was never also ugly. It was never ugly. And so, I remember going to Dusty's memorial service in Tampa. And I was sitting there, and Vince came in with Linda and Hunter and Stephanie. And Pat and I were already there. I was sitting with Flair and his wife, and then Pat and them came and just sat in the row in front of us. And it wasn't until it was over and we went out, or took a break, went out, and there was Vince. And he made eye contact, his eyes lit up, and and it's like two old friends run to embrace each other. And it was, that kind of, I still had so much respect and admiration for him, and he had respect for me, and appreciated, what I had contributed along the way, as with Pat. And so even today, if it was, I'm somewhere with Vince, it's not like, there's Vince, and I gotta hope he doesn't see me, No, I would go up to him, Vince, how the hell you doing? And give him a big hug. And to me, he is, you say, well, some call him a genius. Okay, I'm calling him a genius of somebody, because I got a body of work of working with him, which I can say that Vince is a genius, and because of what I saw us accomplish with him. And he was a visionary. I don't know that there's anybody else, because a lot of people wanted to go, when cable television came, Vince understood the impact that was going to have, and that some of the people in the regional territories were fantasizing that somehow, we just need another talent, or we need a better TV. None of that mattered. And Vince understood the big picture and understood the future and the impact that cable television was going to have on the industry. And Vince made decisions, and he was looking, even then, globally. He was looking at England. He was looking at France. South America, was just something mentioned in passing, because back in those days, the exchange rate was such and you have to go somewhere where you have venues with enough capacity and the ability for the economy to generate X number of dollars for ticket sales to warrant being able to go there. And so Vince understood where made sense to go and where it wasn't, and maybe it would later. And I mean, he was always looking. He was always looking. And I think now all these years have passed, and that every week Vince is still there doing the same thing.
Yep.
And you would think, God, you would think he would have burned out somewhere along the way, but not Vince. He just, and again, it's his company. He's been rewarded for it financially with Stephanie and Hunter. You know, there's somebody that, and even they, you don't have that discussion, but you know that Hunter knows that his involvement is going to be to a certain point, and then whatever that point is, if there's a decision that has to be made that's above that level, as long as Vince is alive, that's the one that's going to make that decision. And Hunter knows that, and he's good with that because he's under the learning tree. And Vince and I are the same age, and you know, you never know what's around the corner tomorrow. And if something happened, I am confident that Hunter with Stephanie would not lose a beat and keeping the momentum going of that company.
Now, as far as you, I mean, you mentioned Triple H and under the learning tree. You're very familiar being under the learning tree and kind of being in that same role as him. Was he unhappy with you in '96 when you decided to leave? Like, was he really upset? Did he not want you to go? What was his reaction to it?
I don't really remember. I don't think I mean, sometimes it's like the 7-year itch, and I left, and I didn't leave with ill feelings or animosity. And there's a certain element of that you can't avoid just because you were there, you're leaving, and somebody's going to be ticked off or they're going to put their own spin on it. And it's just, you move on. And I have a friend up in New Jersey that is probably my closest friend, a guy named Mike Petrino. And he's involved with all kinds of things. He's with other athletes, and he does signings and has done some things with Hunter. He had him for a signing with him. This is going back a year or two ago, maybe a little longer. And you wouldn't know that Mike and I were very close. And in one of the down times, Mike says to Hunter, he said, we have a mutual friend. And Hunter says, oh, yeah, who's that? And he said, JJ Dillon. And Mike calls me the next day, and he said, his eyes lit up. You're friends with JJ? Oh, my. And he said he went on an hour thing about what a great mind you were. And he said it was almost embarrassing to the praise that he was bestowing upon you. And he said, it's unbelievable how high a regard you're held there. I said, well, I'm glad to hear that. I appreciate that. And
that's great.
Yeah. And it's one of the things, I told my son one day, I said, when time comes and I pass or I'm gone or whatever, and as people look at my body of work and reflect on, because I go back to wrestling in the territories. A lot of people don't know that I actually was an active wrestler for the first 5 years. I had 3,200 professional matches before I ever became a manager the first time, when Archie Goldie said, have you ever managed? I said, no, I need a manager. And he said, I've heard your interviews, and that opened another door and another phase of my career that has worked out incredibly well for me. But then I always had that ability as a manager that if I had to work, and I learned from Bobby Heenan. Bobby would talk to me and he would say, well, because Bobby Heenan, I was told by Nick Bockwinkel, he said, Bobby Heenan was a great, great mind. He was so witty, but he said as a talent, he was as good as anybody else on that roster. And he said when Stevens and I were managed by Bobby, were a hot team. We were the team. He said if one of us got hurt, Bobby could substitute in that match and go out there and damn near cause a riot. He said that's how great Bobby is as a performer in the ring, in addition to all of his other qualities. And anytime that I'm mentioned in the same light, it's very gratifying to me that I told my son, I said, when my career is over, he said, when I look back, it's not about, how many titles you won or how many matches you had or how many times you sold out this arena or that arena or who you managed. The bigger thing is I always wanted to be looked back by my peers as somebody that they held with respect.
It definitely seems like they do.
If I have nothing else, just to be respected. And that's the most important thing. And all these other things were what I did each step of my way through my career so that I could say that in my mind, if I am respected, it's not something that somebody gave to me or bestowed upon. I earned it. It's not a guarantee that you're going to have it. It's nice to have it, but it's nice to have the knowledge that it's something that you worked for. And I appreciate the way I'm looked upon, and it's just respect, and that's the most important thing to me. I got two Hall of Fame.
Triple H.
I got 2 Hall of Fame rings.
Yes.
That which are, I guess, validity to the fact that okay, you must have respect or you wouldn't have 2 Hall of Fame rings. But nah, if I didn't have the Hall of Fame rings, I would want to be respected. And it's nice in a case like that where my friend, I can't remember the last time I saw a Hunter, and for my friend to say that he did something with him and had him in for an appearance and just, hey, we got a mutual friend. Oh yeah, who's that? And he said when I mentioned your name, he said, oh my God, JJ. Oh, and then he said, I had to listen to his praise of you for the next hour. And I laughed, almost embarrassed, and I said, well, I feel the same way about him, but I'm glad that it's very nice and very gratifying to know that he feels that way about me.
That is pretty cool. Obviously still glowing and still a lot of respect, and that there's absolutely no heat with you and the McMahons, because you never know. Sometimes you hear a guy exit WWF and you hear that Vince has heat with them forever, and could it be the way they left or this or that, and or they they didn't give notice or they just quit on him. There's always different things you hear that are kind of rumors that there might be some heat with Vince in certain guys, but it's good to see that you were with him for 7, almost 8 years, and there was no heat, that you actually left the company, and he was happy to see you, and then Triple H is praising you as well.
Yeah, if the phone rang tomorrow, I picked up the phone, and it was Vince, and he said, I need something. What do you need? Tell me what and where, and I'll be there. That's my which Vince doesn't need me, but I'm just as a way of example, and or Hunter too. It's like if he called and said, this is something special that we need, and we can't find the right person, and then somebody mentioned your name and you're the perfect thing for it, would you be there to help us? And in no hesitation, not about, well, where, how much, what are you going to pay me? No, those things take care of themselves, and but they don't need me. They're doing incredible business, and I'm thrilled for them, and I'm happy just to have times like this to reflect back on my career. And, there are good times and bad times. And anybody that tells you that they don't go through that, an up or a down, is not being truthful. Every day is not a bed of roses. That's life. But overall, as I look, I wouldn't go back and change anything. and I have met or worked for or been around the who's who of our business. You couldn't, I think you'd be hard pressed to mention a name, and I'd say, oh, that's somebody I never met them. Don't And I have my needs now. I'm 77 years old. I ended up working. I moved to Delaware because I needed benefits with my kids that were still of the age where I had to, and so I got a job with the state. And at the time I was, and WCW had just closed down, and I thought, I got to look for a place to work. And I was looking at all these places. Burger King, hiring a manager. I would go in, hey, how you doing? I saw you got to sign. Oh my God. And I fill out the application, and they'd say, well, there's no way we could pay you anywhere near the kind of money you've made. I said, I know that, but I can't sign my paper that the information is truthful. That's not my demand. I'm the first one to want to adjust my lifestyle. It's a different time, and I'm at a different place in my life. And invariably, I don't know if it's they thought, well, he's saying the right things, but truth be known, I can't imagine that he would be happy for whatever. And I was being sincere. And I bounced around for 3 or 4 months. I was still getting severance pay from wherever I was before. It was WCW or whatever. So it's like I had money coming in. And so it wasn't like I had to find a job the following week, but I was looking for something with benefits. So as the other benefits ran out, I would have a new thing. And I looked and looked and looked, and then like I say, I went to Burger King, went to all these places, and they all knew me. And then I looked at an ad in the Saturday paper for a job fair for the state of Delaware Department of Corrections, which is the prison system.
Yep.
So it was an all-day thing. First you had to took a test, and when you passed the test, then they had 3 people panels that you did a personal interview with, and everybody knew who I was, and I said, well, this is a different chapter of my life. I don't want to be treated any differently than anybody else. This is your industry. And if somebody hires me, I'm coming in, and I want to earn everything that I get in your culture, pay my dues. And there were people who a year later told me that they came in a similar situation, but there wasn't any openings. They were told they would be hired, but they couldn't bring them on board for a year because of, whatever the number of openings were. But again, I hit there at a time where this was in November, and the end of January was the next. They had like a 9-week academy and I got the last opening in that end of January academy. So I had Christmas off, and I was still getting paid from the other job from WCW or where it was, and it was funny when I went and showed up for it was the 9-week thing. When I walked in, nobody spotted me, which that happens sometimes, but a lot of times it's not something that always happens, and it's not, but it has happened where somebody just doesn't make the connection because there's nothing wrestling related or anything that would cause them to. And so I started the thing, and then the week or two, it was like the 9 weeks, and the week or two in, they were going to take a group and go to the prisons, the 3 major prisons, for observation. Okay. Well, I wasn't there for 30 seconds, and the inmates are hanging on the fence. It's JJ Dillon, JJ Dillon. And so the people who were the other cadets were in awe of what was going on, but the instructors, all of a sudden they're doing a double take, and they're looking at me and they're listening to and so the one guy calls me over and he said, are you who I think you are? I said, I don't know who you think I am. And it's like, okay, I can't avoid this, but I take it in stride. And I said, I never made a point of mentioning my background up to the first couple of weeks. And I said, that's the way I wanted it. I'm coming into your business, your industry, and I'm starting at the ground floor, and I don't want to be treated any differently than anybody else. So I said, this happened today, and I would just assume that unless somebody asks you, say, I heard, and then you, yeah. But like it's no big deal. And I would just assume that you not initiate a conversation. You never guess who, I just want to be treated. And they respected that. In fact, maybe they even respected me more because I didn't want that to be what I was about. And I think there were 35 in our class. I was the oldest. I was 61, 63. And the next person younger than me was 47. And there were a bunch of them that weren't even 20 years old yet out of the group of 30. And the guy that was beneath me, that was the 45-year-old, he quit the first week. And,
wow.
It was do it all, the hand-to-hand, and all the book work, which I have a college degree, I could do. And, we went on observation at the prison. The people yelled out. The other cadets, were oblivious to that, but the instructors now knew. And I said, hey, I didn't bring it up because that's not what it's all about. And if somebody had asked me, I would have told them. I'm very proud of what I've done to get me to this point. But my background and my experience, other than the wrestling business teaches you about how to get along with people, human nature. I mean, there's a lot of things that apply to anything and everything else that I would ever do, this included. But I don't want to be treated differently than anybody else. And they said, well, we respect that. And I went through the 9 weeks. Nobody in my class still at the end of 9 weeks knew about my other alter identity. And what's interesting, at the end of 9 weeks for the graduation ceremony, the cadets all had to pick from their class of 35 someone to be a spokesperson and to make some comments at the commencement exercise. Well, they unanimously selected me, not knowing that I'd spent my whole life being on stage.
Yeah, talking to him. Yeah.
So it was kind of like, really? Okay, I think I can handle it. And it ended up, I worked there just a month or two short of 12 years and never had any problems. And it's funny, the inmates, they all knew who I was. And I never talked wrestling, but if they had some comment about wrestling or asked me a question, I would answer their questions or engage in conversation. But I never brought it up, or would then the next time bring it up again. If somebody wanted to talk about it, okay, that's part of my past, and I'm not going to insult you by telling you, oh no, you must be having mixed up with somebody else, and the inmates too. They because I was older too, and I know that in prison there was people there. It was such an eye-opening experience because there was a prison in Trenton, New Jersey, where I was from. There was a big stone wall, and there are many times that I was down around that area, and it's like, God, I wonder what is on that other side of that wall, because it's a whole different world, a whole different economic structure, They gamble. They pay debts. They pay debts. They buy their packs of soup, and a lot of them, you know, pay with that, pay gamble that, and people send in money, and it's an unbelievable. It's a whole structure in and of itself. It's just amazing because that was the biggest prison with like 2,600 inmates. So it was big, and everything from they didn't have, if you get stopped and there's an outstanding warrant for failure to pay child support or something, they don't have a jail system in Delaware. They take you to the prison, and they have a separate area it's called pretrial. In other words, you haven't been adjudicated yet, and you have no contact with anybody that's been convicted and been judged or sentenced. And it's a system that works well here in the state of Delaware. And it was a great learning experience. The inmates all treated me nice because I treated them nice. I treated them with respect. It was like, there's rules that have to be enforced, and housing rules and what have you. And I learned very quickly that, it's something as simple as they're not like they have like dorm things. And one of the things is they're not allowed to like string shoelaces and do their own laundry and hang it there to dry. That's against the housing rules. And they can be written up for that, lose visits, lose this. And that was something that I'm not going to get on somebody's butt because they had to do their own laundry and had nowhere to go with it. And in other words, I picked my battles. In other words, there were things that they knew, you can't do this. They're not allowed to fight. They're not allowed to do this. Not allowed to do, but they knew that with me, don't test him with the serious stuff because he'll come down on you with both feet. But don't worry about the minutia, the small stuff. He's not somebody that, let me see what the booklet says. Oh, you can't do that. You lose your commissary for the week or your visiting privileges. No, it wasn't a power trip for me, believe me. And the inmates, when you first come in, assess you. They don't know what to expect from you. And if you're hard-nosed by the letter of the book, they'll accept that. And they'll work within that. The only thing is, they expect you to be that way each and every day. And if you're somebody like me that picks I draw the line somewhere else, and they know I'm not going to bother them because of something, and then they, especially the older inmates, they respect that you are not going to bend to the serious stuff, but you're not going to be on a power trip and bust their chops over minutia or small time stuff. That's not what he's about. He's not here on a power trip. And so then they don't do things in front of you just if anything, they police themselves because they respect that you don't bust their chops about the little things. And especially with the young ones when they come in. Some of them come in, full of, some have attitude. And it didn't happen very often, but if somebody gave a hint of expressing attitude to me, the next thing I knew, they had a blanket party. The inmates did with that guy. And they would throw a blanket over him and beat the shit out of him and basically tell him, don't ever do that again. He doesn't break the rules, but he doesn't bust our chops over the little things and makes life for us as tolerable as it can be given the circumstances of where we are. And don't you rock the boat and give him a hard time.
I love that basically the WWF head of talent relations kind of got you ready, and so to speak, in your role in other companies as well, got you ready for that. Really,
True.
You dealt with some crazy guys in the WWF when you were head of talent.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's true. But it's a lot of it's common sense, but to me it's common sense, but somebody else, says, well, you have a gift. It's more than just common sense. And, okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that you say that. And God, life was good, and it really is.
And who knew that time in the WWF would prepare you for what you were doing, not too far in the distant past. I mean, it's pretty cool that I was able to do that. And now, as far as the WWF and leaving in '96, we talked a lot about that. And obviously, your next jump would be to a WCW. But I think that is a good stopping point for this week. I think that's just like a good way to stop it. And I feel like as far as coming up on some future shows, I think definitely the jump to WCW, your time in WCW, the relationship with Eric Bischoff, definitely want to get more into that for sure. Obviously, some special guests will be joining the show in the upcoming weeks. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff to cover with you. I mean, just so much stuff to cover and so many cool things to cover. And I just love that we were able to kind of get behind the scenes with you and Vince McMahon and you and Pat Patterson and really talk about your time in the WWF and even exiting the WWF.
Yeah, my whole journey through life has been one positive experience after another. A lot of times you don't, which is, if somebody gave you a book that you, I could turn the page and see what my next journey is going to be, God, life would be so boring, and it's the unknown of a lot of times what's around the corner. And I never feared that, because I had confidence in my own ability and confidence that I could adjust to whatever this scenario was by just being me. And I like I say, I'm the luckiest guy on the face of the earth. I'm 77 years old, and I got 2 Hall of Fame rings and finished my career. A lot of my peers have gone before me. Some are in wheelchairs and walkers, and I'm mobile and get around. And fortunately, it's not like I don't go to a gym. I don't work out in terms of, or have a special diet. I've always eaten what I want, and I guess I could probably, if I was dropped on an island, as long as they had pizza and popcorn, I would survive. And I had some pizza today and some popcorn today. So
that's great.
My children, I love my children. I'm married 3 times. 35 years. I have people probably married. So I've been married 35 years. That's sum total 3 failed marriages. But one was 14 years, one was 17 years, and one was, I think, 18 years. Anyway, total 30. So I'm capable of having a sustained adult relationship. And now I've been divorced and I'm single, living by myself. And now as you get older, you get comfortable with your life, and I don't know that I could ever marry again, or there would be a woman that would ever put up with me just because I'm spoiled. Not that I'm hard to get along with, nothing like that. It's just when you get the freedom of being able to do what you want when you want, and I'm not into jewelry. I'm not into high fashions. I have an apartment that just been here 12 years now, totally meets my needs. I don't need anything else. I have a car that's 10 years old, and I maintain it. It runs well, and my needs are very simple. I have some money put away, and I use that more to help my kids. My youngest, Nicole, is going into her second year of law school. She's the last one.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah. She's at Mercer Law School in Macon. And, so financially being able to help her a little bit, and just just been lucky, real lucky. And I still have my health, and I get a chance to do things like this and make personal appearances. And I really enjoy getting out at the events, whether it's a fan fest or what. And, fans will come up and it's gratifying to know that they're happy to see me and that they want to share with me what their memory is of when they interact, whether they saw me or, somebody up in the Maritimes. Yeah, when you came up there, and I remember, oh man, that's years and years ago. But they're positive memories to them, which are positive memories to me too. And I'm just happy that the business that's given me everything continues to be kind to me, and just hope that hope tomorrow is as good as today.